Hello and welcome to episode 5 of What Makes This Song Special. Thanks again, as always, to everybody who has liked, subscribed, shared, followed the channel. I'm really enjoying doing these episodes. They're great fun for me. They're really cathartic, talking about little parts of my life that may or may not be interesting to others, but I've really enjoyed them. So thanks for tuning in. As always, the way I do these is I'll talk a wee bit about the song, why it's important to me. There'll be a wee story behind the first time I heard the song and maybe what emotions it lifted in me. And then I'll talk a wee bit about the band and the singer. From a vocal coach perspective, I'll talk a wee bit about the singer, not too much as to bore non-singers, but I'll talk a wee bit about it. And then I will do in part 2 a cover version. I've been getting a lot of people asking why I'm doing the cover version as a separate video in part 2. There are a couple of reasons for this. Mainly for rights reasons, because when I sing the song, it's not my song, so there are rights issues where I have to adhere to the rules of YouTube. So yeah, I have to play by the rules and put them on a separate video. But as well as that, I think it's just more accessible if people have heard the story before or watched the story but then wanted to go back and listen to the song. They don't have to flick through and find the song on a big long YouTube video. They can just access the song as a separate cover version. So there are a few different reasons, but I think that's the reason why I'm doing it that way. So just to answer that question to a few folk. So this week's story takes me back to about 1998, I think. I would have been about 5th or 6th year at high school. And I was struggling quite badly with mental health issues. Again, these are things that people don't like to talk about. I think it's important that people are more open about these things, and certainly I kind of wish that I had somebody I could have watched on YouTube when I was younger and gone through these issues to make me feel a bit more like it wasn't just me and I wasn't so kind of alone and isolated. And people don't like to talk about these things. I think people are getting better at talking about these things, but obviously we're going back 20 years, so it was definitely more of more of an issue in terms of opening up about these things, especially at my age group, especially for guys as well. Guys don't like to talk about these things a lot. Men, boys, there's a kind of there's a deep issue with men talking about mental health. So hopefully it helps a few people listening to this. And I'm going to wear my heart on my sleeve a little bit with it. But I won't go into too many dark details. But yeah, I was struggling quite a bit with teenage angst, and I certainly had lots of questions about the world. And I wanted them all answered immediately. I turned 16 or 17, and I was like, I need to know everything about why we're here and what's, am I going to be all right? Is the future going to be okay? Are things going to work out for me? And of course, these are questions that can't be answered, and you just need to eventually accept that. But at this point in my life, I just couldn't accept it. And I had a few friends who were religious. They had a lot of faith in various religions at the time, and they all seemed to have, despite their differing backgrounds of belief, I noticed that they had the one thing in common they had was they all seemed to be very content and much less worried about the future than I did. They all kind of, whether they were Catholic or Protestant or Jewish or Muslim or all of the friends I had at school, they kind of, any of them who were religious or had faith in something higher, they just seemed to sort of give into it and accept that God's got a plan and everything's going to be all right. Whereas I was very worried about these things in the future, and I started having panic attacks, and a lot of that was actually to do with when I first started singing as well. I used to have panic attacks before going on stage, and that developed into kind of deeper issues with obsessive compulsive disorder and sort of negative thoughts and projection and all these things. So I started a sort of soul searching mission. I began going to various churches and chapels and synagogues and with various friends from school to try and find something that spoke to me, something that kind of resonated with me at these various houses of God. but to no avail really. I never really found. I have in adulthood found peace with various of my own beliefs and my own kind of way of looking at the world, and I think that's been an important journey for me, which maybe is for another episode with another song or maybe a couple of episodes. But I certainly didn't find anything in organised religion that answered all the questions for me. So, but yeah, always been very jealous of folk who have found that. They always seem to be very peaceful and content, as I say, fulfilled. But not for me. But yeah, so I'd been given some anxiety medication from the doctor, and I guess I was worried about what that meant for me long term. I think as a kid, when you don't feel like any of your friends are feeling the same way as you, and they're all just enjoying being teenagers and stuff, you start thinking, oh God, is this a phase? Will I be able to get off these tablets? You know, will I end up institutionalized when I'm older? Or will I, all these panic. You always think of all these things that kind of trouble you, and you go into bed at night and you can't sleep, and you think of all these things. So, and out, outwardly at school, I had this very extroverted persona, where I would sort of wander around and be quite cocky and have quite a lot of banter with friends and things like that, where I think everybody just thought that I was super confident and I was singing and I was in bands, but deep down there was a whole other narrative that not many people knew about. A lot of close friends and family were the only ones who really knew. So that was going on, and I was in a band at the time with a couple of friends from school, Mark Livingston and John Filling, who were two of my best pals at school, and we had a pretty cool, powerful three-piece band with a few different names. The names seemed to change every week. The names, we had Angels for Sale, Soho Shift, AIDS, some really random names, often names and titles that we just made to try and shock our peers, and that we thought would be quite humorous and quite cool. So I don't remember what the band name was at the time of this story, but I'd gone back to Mark Livingston's house in Netherley after school, and we had a jam up in his room. He was an amazing guitar player, and he had this really cool Fender Strat, and we would sit up in his room, and he would come up with riff ideas and licks, and I would try and come up with melodies, and we would write some lyrics together. And Mark was always he always wrote really great political lyrics, so did John. So they were into this band called the Manic Street Preachers, who were a Welsh band who were very political. They were also a three-piece, so a bit like us, and really political, very powerful lyrics, great lyricists. The main lyricist was a guy called Richie Edwards, or Richie James, as he called himself. He was a guitarist, rhythm guitarist, and Nicky Wire, who was the bass player. They used to write most of the lyrics for the band. Yeah, we tried to, I suppose they were one of the bands that influenced us. I wasn't as big a fan as Mark or John at first. Mark was always trying to get me into the band, and he eventually won that quest when I sort of gave them a chance and fell in love with their music and their passion, their sound. So that night we were sort of at his after school, and Mark suggested we took a break and we got something to eat. And we sat downstairs, and he was wanting to show me this. There was a BBC Two documentary called From There to Here, and it was about the disappearance of the guitarist Richie, because Richie, who I said who was the main lyricist in the band, he'd struggled massively with depression, anxiety, mental health issues. And in February 1995, round about this, I think about this time of year, like roughly last week or this week, because it keeps coming up in the news again. But yeah, so 27 years ago, sadly. But his car was found near a famous suicide spot called the Severn Bridge, and he was never seen again. They never found his body. Some people believe that obviously he committed suicide, and some people believe that he managed to get away from it all and start a new life, which obviously would be a nice thought, although everybody's always wondered where he is, and it's all very, very, very sad. The documentary followed him in his time there's an album called The Holy Bible. So they wrote this album called The Holy Bible, which was their third album, I think. And every song in this album is dealing with, I was searching for a Holy Bible at the time, some sort of faith to hold on to make me realise how beautiful the world was and how everything was going to be all right. And then I heard this album that night for the first time, and it did the absolute opposite. It sort of pinpointed everything that's wrong with the world. There are songs about depression, abortion, anorexia, prostitution, fascism, racism, corruption of all types, government corruption. It's just, it's a tough listen. It's a really tough listen, and I kind of wasn't ready for it. Mark had sort of introduced me to the Manics, and got me into the more pop songs, like Designed for Life and Motorcycle Emptiness and You Love Us, and songs that are quite accessible to somebody who liked just general melodies and music. And then you get into the Holy Bible's deep. You kind of have to be a super fan to listen to the Holy Bible, and the Holy Bible is, I suppose, their take on what the world's really about and all the problems of the world. And it was so we listened to the Holy Bible and in pieces that night, and we also watched this documentary which followed Richie's time going from mental institution to sort of writing the lyrics for Gold Against the Soul and the lyrics for the Holy Bible album and recording the Holy Bible album. And there was a part in the interview where the interviewer suggested that they weren't, it was all kind of maybe a wee bit, what's the word, like pretentious, and this was an act, a persona they were putting on just to give them a sort of different angle in the music industry. And the interviewer said, "Are you guys really for real? Do you really believe in all these lyrics that you're so passionate about?" And Richie pulled a penknife out of his pocket, and he basically carved into his skin. He carved "for real" into his skin until he was bleeding everywhere and they had to phone an ambulance. And at that point in the documentary, and after listening to the album with Mark, and obviously having been struggling a lot with my own mental health at the time, it was too much for me. And I remember walking out of Mark's house. I said to him, I need to go. I didn't want to let him know how kind of affected and anxious I was, but I was literally shaking listening to that album. And I said to him, I'm going to head up the road. And I walked out into his street and walked down a couple of houses, and I literally threw up. I threw up in the middle of the road because I just couldn't handle the music, the album, the truth, the truth of that album, which I suppose, it's a bit of an extreme story. Sorry to bring throwing up and vomit into it, but I think the point I'm trying to make is, like, music is supposed to be emotive. That is the biggest problem with music at the moment. Music at the moment does nothing. Everything I hear on the radio, whenever, I don't really listen to the radio, but anytime it's on in the car or whatever, it's just repetitive drivel with no lyrical content, no intellectual content, like nothing. Music's supposed to be fun at times, it's supposed to be sad at times, it's supposed to be all of the emotions, and it doesn't always have to be lyrically political or lyrically intellectual, but music's been something since the days of folk music, thousands of years ago, that we used to tell stories and speak our mind and speak our truth. And it's supposed to be emotive. It's supposed to make you dance or sing along or put your hands in the air or cry or throw up in the street. And there's not many songs or albums I can say over the years that have made me physically throw up, but I guarantee if you listen to the Holy Bible by the Manic Street Preachers, it'll do something to you. It is a wonderful, wonderful album. It's pure art. It's so emotive. It's everything that was wrong with the world when they released it in 1998 I should have really done my homework here, but I reckon about 1995, 96. And it's still relevant, sadly, 20 odd years later, 25 years later, because nothing's really changed. And they were trying so hard for change. So, very important band, I think. Not everybody's cup of tea. I understand that they're quite an acquired taste. I'll get on to a wee bit about the band actually. James Dean Bradfield, the singer. He was, I'm pretty sure the story goes that he was busking somewhere in Cardiff, and I think some guy walked past and shouted, "Oh, it's the Manic Street Preacher." I'm not going to try and do a Welsh accent, but I think that's what he shouted to him, or some guy that used to wander around the streets back then and watch him sing and busk in Cardiff used to call him the Manic Street Preacher, so they called themselves the Manic Street Preachers, which is a really good name. I think it's a great name. I think it sums up exactly what they kind of were all about as well. He's got a very shouty vocal style, quite a kind of heavy rock, big belty rock tenor voice. Incredible phrasing, like his ability to articulate long words and phrases was something that always really impressed me, because he didn't write the lyrics, so Richie and Nicky would write the lyrics and then give them to Sean Moore, the drummer, and James Dean Bradfield, who was the lead guitarist and singer, and they would try and write melodies, a bit like the way Elton John and Bernie Taupin work, and that somebody writes a poem and then Elton John takes it and turns it into a song. So that's how they worked it, and I think there are so many big, long, poetic words and phrases in the lyrics that James Dean Bradfield did an incredible job of turning into melodies and also managing to, articulate them at high speed, whilst playing guitar. Really impressive. So great breath control for that, of course, from a singing point of view, because, as I said, the phrases are very wordy. Lots of glottal compression. So that means that the vocal cords come really, really, really close together. There's lots of closure to aperture ratio. And then with a quite high larynx position, but countered very well with a sort of open throat and open vowels. And that's the only way you could really do that. If you don't open the throat and open up your vowels on high notes like that, then you really would sort of kill your voice. And James Dean Bradfield's voice, to be fair to him, I think he's probably about 50 now, and I heard him singing something live on YouTube not that long ago, and he can still do it. It's very shouty, and it's maybe not quite as pure as it was 10, 20 years ago, but he's managed to still hold it together. Definitely the high larynx position, pulling chest isn't the greatest idea for longevity as a singing technique, but he's made it work for him, and I think without that style the songs wouldn't have had the same gutsy, ballsy sound that they do. So I think that's really important, and it suits the narrative of the very political and often kind of angry lyrics that the Manic Street Preachers were famous for. So yeah, there's my wee story. A song. I didn't tell you about the song. I just told you about the album. So the song is called "This Is Yesterday," and it's one of the songs in the Holy Bible album. There are so many songs in the Holy Bible album. Almost all of them are very difficult to play just with a guitar and a vocal, or a piano and a vocal. They're all quite the whole arrangement from the band's very important, and conveying the sort of anger and things. So I picked "This Is Yesterday" because it's probably one of the more acoustic tracks on the album, and I think it will be a nice one to cover, which I'll be doing in a few minutes once I change the microphones. And that's another reason why I do them in two different parts, because I use a different microphone most of the time for singing, and I put in my headphones and things so I can hear myself properly. So there are a few different reasons, but thanks once again for listening. I hope I covered everything there that I was wanting to. As always, please like and share and hit the subscribe button if you can. It would mean a lot. Jump onto Instagram. There are links in the bio, so Instagram, Facebook, and you can keep up to date with all the different things I'm doing. And please leave comments as to why this song or that album is important to you. Thanks so much.